Poštovani gledalci, evo mi se nalazimo na Srpskom festivalu ovde u Los Angelesu u crkvi Sveti Stevan. U crkvi Sveti Stevan uglavnom dolaze ljudi koji su srpski potomci. Dolaze i ljudi koji su se skoro doselili iz Srbije, znači oni koji su, eto da kažemo, pravi Srbi, imaju srpski pasoš, ali ovde u Americi živi jako puno srpskih potomaka. Kažu ljudi da ih ima oko 5 miliona. Jedan od njih sa kojim danas razgovaramo, veliki Srbin, je Bil Dorich. Bil Dorich je publisher, izdavač, čovjek piše knjige i veoma često jako promoviše Srbiju. Bill, welcome to our show. Can you
Thank you.
yourself a little bit?
Okay, Bil Dorich. I'm first generation American. My father was from Voynich and Topisko, Glina area. During World War II, when the Serbian church in Glina was burned, or in Voynich was burned, 97 Serbians locked inside, 17 were my relatives. And then during Operation Storm in 1995, when 230,000 Serbs were cleansed from Croatia, the last 5 relatives of my name were too old and too sick to flee, and I was notified by the Red Cross a month later they were found with their throats slit. So I have a passion for my people. Even though I was born here, my father and mother, both Serbian, instilled in me this idea that you have to stand up for your people. And I've written 9 books, 6 on the Balkans. My newest book is written about what took place during the war. I wrote a book called Serbia Faces and Places. After the war, we were so demonized by the international press. People thought we were from Siberia. They hadn't a clue who we were. So I went to Serbia. I took over 3,000 photographs, and I put together Serbia Faces and Places so that the people here in the United States could understand, what does Serbia look like? What do our people look like? I interviewed lots of people, and I did little vignettes through the book of various people and villages to give the readers an idea of not only the people, what they do, the scenic beauty of Serbia, which is unbelievably magnificent. And we put the book together. It ended up being almost 400 pages, and 500 of my images are in it. But that was a wonderful book project that I totally enjoyed because it was positive.
Did you have support for that book? Or
No. Bil Dorich, my co-author, and I both invested in this book to create what needed to be done, because I thought it was very important that not only our people be proud of a book about them, but that Americans could learn about us. So many of my books, I've done books on the church. I did a book called A Brief History of Serbian Music, because a lot of people didn't realize, particularly here in the United States, that under Turkish occupation for over 400 years, we were denied an education. We were denied a right to even play musical instruments. So it didn't come alive as far as Serbian composers until after World War I, and suddenly our composers came to life. Mokranjac is my favorite, and his church music as a tenor, I think he wrote the music for me. So I'm very proud of what Mokranjac and some of the others did, but I particularly like his music, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. I sang with a Serbian orchestra here in Los Angeles when I was in college called the Hajduk. They were part of the St. Sava Church, and I was in Aman, which is a folk ensemble at UCLA. So I was their male soloist, and I sang with Hajduk for many years. And so I have a love for my music as well as my people.
What kind of reactions do you have when Americans are reading your book, Serbia Faces and Places?
Surprising thing, when I started my Facebook page about 2 years ago, I put the page up and I wrote a few things on it, and within 8 hours I had 1,000 people, and it absolutely blew me away. We now have over 6,000 people, I can post something and immediately get a couple of hundred responses. I did a piece day before yesterday on Tesla. The Croatians again came up with this concept that Tesla is the native son of Croatia, and I really get angry about that kind of false history. Tesla was born in 1858, and that was before there was ever a Croatia. In 1102, the Croats gave up their throne to the Austrian Empire, and they joined the empire gladly as vassals. And if people don't know what the word vassal means, it means slave. They weren't allowed to own property. They weren't allowed to declare anything, no public or political position. They had no political position. They were slaves. And when the Serbs brought the first victory in World War I at Serbia, marching all the way from Salonika to the Austrian border, liberating Serbia, and it was obvious that the Serbs were going to win the war, the Croats, like rats fleeing a sinking ship, ran into the arms of their Serbian enemies. And Churchill created this stupidity of the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, and unfortunately our people went along with the mockery of that. And that Churchill marriage was made in hell, and we suffered for decades by joining forces with our own enemies. So I've written a lot about that history. In 1992, I wrote the book Kosovo at a time when people in the United States couldn't pronounce the word or find it on a map. And I did the book here through the diocese, and we raised over $250,000, and most of that went to Serbian orphans. At the time, we had about 20,000 Serbian orphans from the war. And by the end of the war, we had something like 30,000 Serbian orphans. And through IOCC, which is the Orthodox Christian Charities, we donated the money through them to help our people, mostly in Kosovo. So particularly after the bombing, the damage done to our country was hideous. It's $100 million worth of infrastructure damage. Serbia still suffers from 20% unemployment. And who's taking in the 800,000 refugees today and feeding them out of their own kitchen? Serbia is. And we have nobody else. Well, and nor the Arab countries. You have, look, Saudi Arabia built a refugee camp with fireproof tents and air-conditioned tents. The camp is large enough to hold 3 million people. Not one single refugee is there. None of them are taking them. Bahrain, Yemen, Jordan, none of them are taking any refugees at all. And they're dumping them on the doorstep of Europe. And I believe it's a way of infiltrating Europe with Muslim terrorists. I really do. Well, 90% of the people you see in all these photographs are men of military age. No women and children. If things were so terrible in Syria, why did they leave their wives and their children behind? So there's something very suspicious about this infiltration of 900,000 Muslims. Very, very strange. So.
Did you ever have any problems here in the USA because you were writing books about it?
Oh, sure. I've had about 20 death threats. Oh, sure. At one time, in 1992 and 93, the FBI contacted me and said, would like to attach a device on your telephone so that we might be able to catch the people threatening you. And I went along with it, and every time I would get a death threat, I called a special phone number. They could tell where the call came from. I didn't know this technology existed. And suddenly all these threats stopped. And I said, well, will you tell me who it was? They says, only if it becomes a court case, and you would have to testify. But I am highly suspicious that it was some Croatians, because I could kind of tell by the accents. And I always recorded my phone calls coming in, so we had voice tapes of people who were threatening me. And that stopped about 1994, 1995, they stopped.
That was the time when
Yeah,
the war was.
that's right. That's right.
But right now, everything is
Everything's fine, and I have tons of followers, and I enjoy writing about our people. I enjoy writing about the politics, and I keep them guessing, am I a Democrat or am I a Republican? I'm not. I'm an independent.
So you are respecting both.
I'll respect both. All people have good ideas. I mean, let's take a piece from the Republicans and a piece from the Democrats and put something together instead of playing like we're children in a play yard attacking each other. That doesn't solve any problems. That doesn't solve any. Yeah. Yes.
What do you think about relationships between America and Serbia?
Well, they're slowly changing, but unfortunately our people were under the delusion, and it is a delusion, that the Americans can be trusted with foreign policy. The Americans put a goalpost, and every time the Serbians agreed to do something that the Americans demanded, the goalpost would get moved. So aid to Serbia, I mean, look what happened during the flood. Vice President Biden even said, we're not going to give you any aid because you took aid from Russia. Well, what kind of nonsense is that? A person who's starving or injured or needed help from that flood, they don't care who gives them the help, but give them help. And we didn't do that. We used politics. And I think Serbians need to be reminded constantly who their enemy is. And the Americans have not come to the table with clean hands. I mean, when I go back to the beginning of the war in Croatia, I am a rare blood type. And the Red Cross calls me every 85 days, particularly for surgery, because my blood is, I don't smoke, and I drink very little, so my blood is pretty clean. But they would call me specifically for surgeries, and I could never turn them down. I have pins. I've given over 8 gallons of blood in my lifetime. When they denied food and medicine to Serbs in Belgrade, and Mrs. Dole, who was the president of the Red Cross at the time, said she wouldn't give aid to Serbia because we were the aggressors. How do you be an aggressor in your own country? And I stopped giving blood. I wrote an article in the American Serbabron asking my people, do not donate anything to the Red Cross if your donation is going to be so abused by someone like Mrs. Dole. And fortunately, she's no longer there, but the Red Cross was, during the war, you couldn't even get an aspirin in Belgrade. You couldn't get X-ray chemicals. People that went to doctors had to bring their own bandages because there was nothing there. We had babies dying for a simple lack of antibiotics in the hospitals. Yes, if you realize in World War I, the Serbians lost 52% of their adult male population. And they fought, they had the first victory at Serbia in World War I. They marched from the beaches of Salonika all the way to the Austrian border, liberating Serbia. And when it became apparent that the Serbs were going to win the war, the Croats, like rats fleeing a sinking ship, joined with Churchill's idea of this shotgun marriage called the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. So the Serbs were asked to give up their nationhood to join with their criminal elements that fought against them in the war. And they immediately, we had an assassination in the parliament immediately after, and there was discourse with the Croatians until they got what they wanted. They wanted their own independent state, and they finally got it. They paid $60 million to Reuter and Finn, the biggest public relations firm in the world, to gain that by brainwashing the American public through that money process. The Muslims in Bosnia did the same thing. Through the Freedom of Information Act, I have unearthed documents that they spent $72 million with Reuter and Finn. And Reuter and Finn one time was interviewed on television, and James Harf, I think his name is, one of the leading people at Reuter and Finn. They questioned something he wrote about the Serbians, and he says, we're not paid to be moral. So in other words, if they tell a lie and they manipulate the facts, An adjustment in the paper 3 days later on page 25 is where it ends up. Small letters, exactly. So they're hiding the propaganda that they created themselves. And the Serbs weren't allowed in the 90s to hire a public relations firm. I had the first Serbian lobby in the United States called SAVA, and the acronym is the Serbian American Voters Alliance. It's a legal corporation. I put it in suspension the day that the bombing started in 1999. It's still in suspension. The Justice Department, the State Department think they can stop us from me bringing the Sava Corporation out of mothballs and having a legitimate lobby in Washington, D.C. But that takes money. It'll take $500,000 to do an annual report for every year that I was in suspension. And once I do an annual report, I can take that corporation out of the mothballs and have a legitimate Serbian lobby in Washington. But our people won't support it. I mean, I spent my own money. I mean, David Vujic and I, who created that Serbian lobby, he lost his home, he lost his job, I lost half of my retirement account, but the Serbians wouldn't even help me pay my $1,500 a month phone bill. So how can you fight a war if your own people won't contribute? Serbians don't contribute. And in the 3 or 4 years we had the Serbian lobby, I don't think we raised $500,000. Yet our Croat and our Muslim friends raised millions, tens of millions. And they were able to buy the media, they were able to promote their propaganda, and we had no voice. I was invited to the White House once with 10 other Serbians to meet with Albright and with Clinton. When they found out I wrote an article about Madeleine Albright called Liar, Liar, they called me a week later and they uninvited me.
Oh, really?
Now you're not welcome, because you have to give them your social security number and your birth certificate and identity so you can go into the White House. And I did all of that. And then a week later they said, well, we're not inviting you. So sometimes being a big voice has big consequences.
It's the way of politics.
Yes.
The worldwide politics.
Yes.
Because big corporations
Yes.
who control and own entire world.
They own the politicians.
Yeah, they own the politics.
Yeah.
They own countries.
The only reason they're against Donald Trump right now is he's got his own billions. He doesn't need their
What do
money.
you think about Donald Trump?
Well, I don't agree with a lot of things he says, because I think he says them for impact. And I hope that doesn't destroy a good opportunity for a man without financial connections and using other people's money and to have to return favors for that money. He would be a good president because he doesn't owe anybody anything. But I'm afraid the media will bring him down. I mean, they're already starting to chip away at him. And they find any excuse. I mean, this week it's calling the president a Muslim. Well, let the president defend himself. I mean, why should they be questioning him about having to defend the president? Let him defend himself. So the media is manipulating this. And I think this week's so-called debate was like kindergarten. It was like kids in the play yard throwing stones at each other. I mean, there was no substance. Nobody talked about jobs. Nobody talked about the economy. Nobody talked about immigration problems. They talked about calling each other names. So, I mean,
So if you are like somebody in Serbia, like prime minister, what would you do?
I would keep my nose clean and do my own business and not play the political games. I mean, look at what happened with Tito. Tito played the political games, and when the war started, he was $39 billion in debt. Okay? We go in there and bomb Serbia. We do $100 billion in damage to the country. Who's going to pay for all of that? The Serbians can't pay for that. And why did we have, after World War II, we had the Marshall Plan, and we went into Germany and Japan, and rebuilt those countries that we bombed and destroyed. Why aren't we doing that to Serbia? 60 bridges alone could cost $10 billion to rebuild. But nobody's giving Serbia the hand up to help them rebuild their country. So there's something very rotten about it. So if I were elected to office in Serbia, I would run my own country and inspire my own people to prosper and help each other. Sama sloga has got to mean something, because for decades it has meant very little. Well,
And he died like a fool.
like a pauper. That's right. Yes.
So what you can do against the big corporation?
You can fight back. You can fight.
How?
It's not how. You start a movement to join forces, to jointly agree to do things. We can't get Serbians to agree on what time to go to lunch. I mean, you put 5 people in a room and you end up with 6 presidents. I mean, we run organizations like the Democratic, like the Republican meeting the other night on TV. You can't get them to agree on anything. But they can agree on joining forces, make Sama sloga mean something, and rebuild together. Pull their brother up by the hand. Pull them up and help them. I'm in a Jewish community on the west side of Los Angeles. Jews will drive a mile to patronize a Jewish business. Serbians won't walk across the street to patronize the Serbs. And I know, I've published books for 31 years. I can count maybe 100 or 150 Serbs who bought books from me. There are 300,000 Serbs here in Los Angeles. There are a million and a quarter Serbs in the United States. But I can't sell 2,000 or 3,000 books when I put a book out. That doesn't make any sense, because they don't support each other. So that's our major problem. Yeah. And we have to get over that. We have to get over stepping in the way of people trying to make a difference. I know that when I did the 4 Kosovo charity events here in Los Angeles, I had all these yes but Serbians. Everything is yes but. You can't do that. Why? Well, you can't do that. Yes, you can. You do it and you do it. If you aren't going to help me do it, I do it myself. And believe me, I did a lot of those with my wife. We did the center table decorations. We printed the program. I invited the guests to come and speak. I was the master of ceremonies, and I printed the invitations. So, I mean, if they wouldn't do it, I'll do it, but don't stand in my way. So that's the Bil Dorich story.
That's the story. How many books did you print that Serbia faces in places?
We did about 3,500. We still have maybe 300, 400 left. Yeah, sold out. Yeah.
Most of them are Serbian or American?
No, I sell them to America. I get all these Americans, Germans. A lot of Jewish people bought my book. It surprises me sometimes when I get the sale on the internet and go look at the address and the name isn't Serbian. So, but so that's tough. That's the tough part of being self-employed and being in business. Is you turn around and there's nobody there. So that's tough, and the Serbians have to learn to support each other. And it's possible. Don't be jealous. Be helpful.
That's our problem.
Yeah. Go to these Serbian events, and you have people that'll go up to the bar and they'll buy a drink for 4 or 5 of their friends. They throw $20 or $30 on the bar. You go up and say, "Well, can you give me a $10 donation for the Serbian children?" "Oh no, I already gave to that." Well, I know they haven't, but that's what our people do. We got to get beyond that. We got to get to the point where we take pleasure and joy out of seeing some Serbian make it better than we did. I mean, my father was a coal miner for 35 years and he died of black lung disease. He was more proud of any little thing I accomplished because he couldn't in his lifetime. And he had a 3rd grade education when he came here. And he was happy to speak English, to be an American, and that he had two sons that went to college and were successful. And you need to have that same pride in not just your own family, but in everybody in your culture. And we just don't do a good job of that. So.